Death means something different in Hunter x Hunter. In many anime, death is a spectacle, a dramatic moment punctuated by swelling music, a meaningful flashback, a final speech that wraps everything up neatly. Sometimes the character comes back. Sometimes their sacrifice powers up the people they leave behind in ways that feel almost transactional. You lose someone, you gain strength. The story continues. Hunter x Hunter doesn't work like that. Number 10. Ponzu. Ponzu earned her place. That's the first thing worth establishing, because it matters. The Hunter exam is one of the most brutal selection processes in the world, a gauntlet designed to eliminate the unprepared, the unlucky, and the underpowered. Ponzu survived it. She navigated dangerous criminals, hostile environments, and opponents with abilities far more overtly destructive than her own. She passed where countless others failed. Her ability, using trained bees as a delivery system for various chemical agents, isn't flashy, it's clever. It reflects someone who approached a world of overwhelming physical power and found a way to remain relevant through ingenuity. There is something quietly admirable about that. She never pretended to be something she wasn't. She worked within her limitations and found a way through. Then the Chimera Ant arc happened, and working within her limitations was no longer enough. Ponzu's death is horrifying precisely because of how it's constructed. She realizes the threat. She understands, with the clarity of someone who has survived dangerous situations before, that what she's encountering is categorically different from anything she's faced. She doesn't freeze or fall apart. She tries to send a warning. She does everything right. Everything a competent, courageous person would do in an impossible situation. And she still dies. Quickly, without drama, without the narrative pausing to acknowledge what's being lost. That's the point. Her death isn't about her failure. It's about the scale of the threat the Chimera Ants represent. They aren't enemies that competence can reliably overcome. They're a force of nature wearing the faces of predators, and Ponzu's death is the series' way of communicating that the rules have fundamentally changed. The Hunter exam prepared her for a world that no longer exists. She deserved better. The story knows it. And it refuses to pretend otherwise by giving her a meaningful last stand. Number 9. Kurt and Reina. Some deaths in Hunter. Hunter carry weight through what they represent. Kurt and Reina carry weight through what they are. Children. They're not hunters. They're not Nen users. They don't have special abilities or secret knowledge or connections to powerful people. They're ordinary kids living ordinary lives in a village that happens to be in the path of the Chimera Ant Queen's expansion. They have no framework for understanding what's happening to them, no tools to resist it, and no reasonable expectation that the world would ever ask them to. When the ants arrive, the outcome is never in question. The audience understands before Kurt and Reina do that they cannot survive this encounter. There's no hope of rescue, no dramatic turn that changes the calculus. Just helplessness and the particular horror of watching characters who are completely innocent encounter something they have no way to comprehend. What makes their death significant beyond the immediate tragedy is what they establish. Hunter x Hunter had, up to this point, presented a world that was dangerous and sometimes brutal, but still navigable. A world where intelligence and ability and determination could get you through. Kurt and Reina's deaths close the door on that framing for the Chimera Ant arc entirely. These ants don't simply defeat people. They consume them. They fold human lives into their expansion without hesitation or malice, which is somehow worse than malice. Malice implies the person you're hurting registers to you as a person. These children don't even register. Their deaths are an early signal that the Chimera Ant arc is going somewhere the rest of the series hasn't gone. And they're right. Number 8. Pokkle. Pokkle's death is an exercise in sustained dread. He's a licensed hunter. That means something in this world. It means you've proven yourself against competition that eliminated most who attempted it. It means you're resourceful, capable, and experienced enough to navigate situations that would destroy ordinary people. A hunter has, by definition, demonstrated the capacity to survive. None of that matters when Neferpitou captures him. The specific horror of what happens to Pokkle isn't simply that he dies. It's that he doesn't die immediately. He's kept alive. He remains conscious and aware throughout the process, his knowledge extracted with surgical precision while he watches, unable to stop any of it. His expertise, the very thing that made him a hunter, the thing he spent years developing, is the reason he's kept alive long enough to suffer. It's a kind of cruelty that Hunter x Hunter rarely makes explicit, but that lands with enormous weight when it does. Neferpitou isn't sadistic in the conventional sense. There's no enjoyment of his suffering, no gloating. His consciousness is simply a useful resource to be accessed, and the fact that accessing it causes agony is irrelevant information. Pokkle's death destroys an assumption the audience has been carrying, that being a hunter provides some meaningful protection. That skill and experience and the official recognition of those qualities translates to a reasonable chance of survival. The Chimera Ant arc is, in many ways, built on the systematic destruction of that assumption. Pokkle is one of its most painful demonstrations. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't unprepared. He was simply outclassed in a way that left him no options, and he had to remain aware long enough to know it. Number 7. Uvogin Hunter. Hunter. Uvogin is not a good person. That needs to be said clearly because Hunter x Hunter earns its emotional complexity by not pretending otherwise. He's a murderer. A member of the Phantom Troop, an organization responsible for the deaths of enormous numbers of people, including the near-total massacre of an entire ethnic group. His power is matched by his indifference to the suffering he causes. He approaches violence with the casual enthusiasm of someone who has never been forced to consider its cost, because nothing in his experience has ever seriously threatened him. And yet, his death remains one of the series' most impactful moments. Not because we mourn him exactly, but because of what his death reveals about Kurapika. And about what revenge actually looks like when you finally get it. The confrontation between Kurapika and Uvogin is one of the most emotionally layered sequences in the series. Kurapika has spent years preparing for exactly this moment. He has built his entire nen ability around the specific purpose of fighting the Phantom Troop. He has chained his emotions, constrained his power, and organized his existence around a singular objective: justice or something close enough to it. When he finally faces Uvogin, he wins. Decisively. The power dynamic that Uvogin has spent his entire life assuming is absolute. His physical superiority, his untouchability, collapses completely. And there's nothing on the other side of it. The Kurta clan is still dead. Their eyes are still scattered across the world. Kurapika is still the last survivor, still carrying the weight of everyone he couldn't save. Uvogin's death changes none of that. The emptiness that follows his defeat is the series making an argument that revenge is real and sometimes achievable and entirely insufficient, that you can get exactly what you wanted and discover that wanting it was the wrong framework all along. Uvogin dies, and the tragedy continues uninterrupted. That's what makes this death hurt. Number 6. Shaiapouf. Shaiapouf is a fanatic. That's the most honest description of him. His devotion to Meruem isn't love in any healthy sense. It's the complete subordination of a self to an ideal. Everything Pouf is, everything he does, every calculation and manipulation and sacrifice exists in service of one purpose: the king. Meruem's elevation, Meruem's power, Meruem's purity as a being who transcends the limitations of lesser creatures. Pouf doesn't worship Meruem the way a person worships a god. He worships Meruem the way a person worships their own sense of identity when that identity has collapsed entirely into something external. This is what makes his end so psychologically devastating. When the miniature rose poison begins its slow work, Pouf faces something he is completely unequipped to handle. The reality that devotion is not protection. That wanting something badly enough, sacrificing enough for it, structuring your entire existence around it. None of it guarantees the outcome you're working toward. Meruem is dying. Meruem is spending his final hours with a human girl whom Pouf considers the source of the contamination that ruined his king. And there is nothing Pouf can do. His physical suffering during the poison's progression is real, but it's almost secondary to the psychological collapse happening simultaneously. Every assumption he built his existence on is being dismantled in real time. The king he devoted his life to doesn't need him at the end, doesn't want him present, has found something in Komugi's company that Pouf, for all his intelligence and capability, was never able to provide. He dies having failed completely, not despite his devotion but in some sense because of it. His fanaticism blinded him to the very qualities that were transforming Meruem, and he spent his final days fighting against the thing that gave the king's last hours meaning. It's a tragedy built entirely from the inside out, which is the cruelest kind. Number 5. Menthuthuyoupi. Youpi's tragedy is quieter than Pouf's, and in some ways more affecting for it. Where Pouf is defined by psychological complexity, by jealousy and calculation, and an identity built on devotion, Youpi is simpler. He is, at his core, a creature of combat. His identity is straightforward. He is powerful, he exists to fight, and the experience of overwhelming force is the primary language through which he understands the world. This isn't presented as a criticism. It's simply who he is. Then the poison strips that away. What Togashi does with Youpi in his final hours is give him something he was never supposed to have: self-reflection. As his body fails and the certainty of his death becomes undeniable, Youpi begins experiencing something unfamiliar. He thinks about Meruem. He thinks about Knuckle, the hunter whose fight against him he found unexpectedly compelling. He wonders, genuinely wonders, perhaps for the first time, about things that have nothing to do with power or combat. He discovers curiosity. He discovers something adjacent to respect, and perhaps to regret. The tragedy isn't that a powerful being loses his power, though that's part of it. The tragedy is the timing. Youpi spends his entire existence as one thing, and only in the final moments before that existence ends does he begin to become something else. The capacity for growth was always there. It just never had the room or the reason to emerge. He dies at the beginning of a transformation he'll never get to complete. And there's a particular kind of sorrow in that. The person you might have become, glimpsed only in the moment you run out of time to become them. Number 4. Kite's death is a before and after moment for Hunter x Hunter. Not just for Gon and Killua, though it destroys both of them in different ways. For the audience, there's a version of the series that exists before Kite's death and a version that exists after it, and they're not quite the same story. Part of what makes Kite's loss so significant is his position in the narrative. He's the person who knew Gon's father. He's the experienced adult hunter who serves as a bridge between the generation of Ging freaks and the generation of Gon and Killua. He represents the possibility that you can navigate this world's dangers long enough to accumulate genuine wisdom. He represents survival. He's also, in the moments leading to his death, exactly what a skilled hunter should be. He assesses the threat immediately and accurately. He recognizes that Neferpitou represents something beyond what any of them can handle. He makes the decision to sacrifice himself in a way that gives the others a chance to escape. Even his final act is deliberate, the controlled use of his ability to ensure that Gon and Killua get out. None of it is enough. What happens to his body afterward is the true horror. He isn't simply killed. He's repurposed. Neferpitou uses him as a training dummy, reducing someone who was a complete human being, with a history, relationships, and a particular way of moving through the world, to an object, a tool, something that wears the shape of a person without any of the substance. Gon sees this, and it breaks something in him that doesn't heal during the arc. His response, the slow, methodical dismantling of himself in pursuit of enough power to confront Pitou, is one of the most disturbing character journeys in anime. Kite's death doesn't just remove a mentor figure. It initiates a process of self-destruction in the protagonist that the series treats with complete seriousness. The ripples extend outward for the rest of the Chimera Ant arc and beyond. Kite's death is a stone dropped into still water, and the waves keep expanding. Number 3. The Kurta clan. Some of the most painful deaths in Hunter x Hunter are deaths we never see. The massacre of the Kurta clan happens before the series begins. By the time Kurapika enters the story, it's history. The village is gone. The people are gone. The specific texture of that community, the way they spoke to each other, what they celebrated, what they feared, how their children played, all of it is gone, permanently and completely, without the series ever showing it to us directly. Togashi's decision to keep the massacre off-screen is one of the most powerful choices in the series. We learn about it gradually, in fragments. A line here, a reference there. The way Kurapika's face changes when the subject comes up. The specific, controlled quality of his grief, which is the grief of someone who has spent years trying to keep the scale of their loss from consuming them entirely. The Kurta clan's scarlet eyes were considered among the most beautiful things in the world. They were also, for the Phantom Troop, simply a commodity, something to be collected, stored, and sold. The entire community, men, women, children, elderly, everyone, was erased not out of hatred or ideology, but out of the same indifferent acquisitiveness that might motivate someone to clear-cut a forest for lumber. They happened to have something valuable. That was the entirety of the calculus. What makes this loss so unbearable is its completeness. A culture doesn't disappear when its people die. It disappears when there's no one left to carry it. The Kurta clan's traditions, their language, their way of understanding the world, their particular form of beauty, all of it dies with them, because Kurapika is the last survivor and one person cannot sustain a culture alone. He survives. But survival, as Hunter x Hunter understands clearly, is not the same thing as living. Kurapika carries the weight of everyone he couldn't save in every scene he appears in. His purpose is inseparable from his grief. And the series never pretends that he'll be able to set that grief down. Not after the troop is defeated, not after the eyes are recovered, not after any resolution the plot can offer. Some absences are permanent. The Kurta clan is one of them, and the series treats that permanence with the honesty it deserves. Number 2. Isaac Netero Hunter. Exeum, Hunter. Isaac Netero is, by any reasonable measure, the greatest hunter who ever lived. Decades of discipline, decades of training, decades of pushing his body and his nen to limits that no one else has ever approached. He didn't arrive at his power through talent alone. He arrived through a process of almost incomprehensible dedication, the legendary training regimen he put himself through, the years of isolation and repetition and refinement. Whatever Netero is in the present of the story, he built himself into it through an act of sustained will that most people couldn't sustain for a week, let alone a lifetime. When he confronts Meruem, he knows the truth before the fight begins. Not suspects. Knows. His read on the situation is accurate and immediate. Meruem, the king of the Chimera Ants, is something that humanity's strongest warrior cannot defeat through conventional means. The gap between them is real. Netero's ability to compress time, to reach speeds that transcend normal perception, to channel his nen through the most powerful technique he's ever developed. None of it is enough. He fights anyway. The battle between Netero and Meruem is one of the great sequences in anime, not because of its choreography, but because of what it means. We're watching a human being, the best human being, optimized in every way that human beings can be optimized, encounter his ceiling, and refuse to stop climbing. Netero doesn't fight Meruem because he believes he can win. He fights Meruem because the fight itself has meaning, and because someone has to stand in that space, and because he has spent his entire life preparing himself to be the person who stands there. His final act, the zero hand, the last reservoir of everything he's ever accumulated, deployed in full knowledge that it still won't be enough, is followed by something else. Something he built into himself for exactly this contingency. The miniature rose is the real answer to a question that combat can't resolve. Netero's death is the rare kind that contains both defeat and victory, grief and something almost like pride. He didn't save humanity by himself. He couldn't. But he held space long enough, extracted enough cost, gave enough of himself that the rest of the plan could function. He was the hinge on which everything else turned. He dies at the apex of his life, having done the most consequential thing he's ever done. That doesn't make it hurt less. It might make it hurt more. Number 1. Meruem and Komugi Hunter x Hunter. There is no death in Hunter x Hunter more painful than this one. Not because it's the most violent, it isn't. Not because it's the most sudden. It's the opposite of sudden, drawn out across quiet hours in a small room. It's the most painful because of what it means. When Meruem is born, he is the most dangerous being in the world and he knows it. He enters existence with power that dwarfs anything humanity has produced and an intelligence that processes strategic information at a level no human can match. He also enters existence with a complete absence of anything resembling empathy. Humans are not people to him in any meaningful sense. They're livestock, background, the material the world is made of, unremarkable and interchangeable. Then he sits across a game board from Komugi. She is, by every measure Meruem previously applied, someone who should not register. Fragile, blind, unremarkable in appearance, without combat ability, without nen, without any of the qualities that the king was designed to recognize as significant. She should have been invisible to him. Instead, she beats him at Gungi. Again and again. In the one domain where Meruem expected his extraordinary mind to assert itself, a blind girl from a village no one has heard of defeats him consistently enough that it forces him to genuinely engage. To try. To want to win, not because winning is strategic, but because something in the contest itself matters to him. What follows is one of the most extraordinary character transformations in anime. It happens slowly, through the accumulation of small moments. A game played, a conversation had, something noticed in Komugi's expression when she's fully absorbed in the board. Meruem begins to experience something his entire biology